All right, good morning. Let's get snipping on today's 30-minute topic, vomit, cleanup, and other required plans. We've presented all the changes to the food code for the past several years, but during these quick snippets, we are highlighting the use of several accessory documents that we hope both explain the intent of the code section and also help with implementation. We call the materials the AMC Toolkit. Please know that these materials are a set of recommendations to assist operators and to assist local health departments. They are not actually required to be used. An operator can submit any acceptable written plan that works for their establishment and their local health department. You can access the toolkit online on our website, doh.wa.gov/food rules. There you'll find 8 toolkit documents. We also have the materials translated into several languages, and we'll post those as soon as we get the translations verified. We've designed the toolkit documents as a fillable form for ease of use, which also blocks the changes to the main text of the form. So if you try to edit and make changes to the document, you'll notice that you're blocked from doing that, except for just adding in the fillable form portions. However, if you're savvy with Word, you can modify the document by customizing the ribbon of options and adding what's called the Developer tab. Once you've added the Developer tab, you can select Restrict Editing and then stop enforcing protections. There's no password needed, so all you have to do is accept it, and it should allow you then to edit the document. You can reach out to us if you have any questions about modifying the documents as well. Okay, so all written plans help ensure consistency and understanding for staff, and several of you identified that during the conversation when we have the chat. There are only a few that are specifically required by the code to be written. We've highlighted a few of them on here today. The majority of plans that must be written are specific to the food establishment's practices. So these are included in the first 2 sections. So businesses that refill consumer-owned containers, hold foods using time instead of temperature, or use advanced practices such as vacuum packaging, they must have written plans. However, there is one plan that every food establishment must have, and that is a written vomit and diarrhea cleanup plan, which will be the focus of our discussion today. Now, we also have it, and several of the highlighted plans on the screen are included in our AMC Toolkit. So really do encourage everyone to look at those in case they can use those plans to modify for their businesses. The requirements for written plans, especially the vomiting and diarrheal cleanup plan, is not unique to Washington. The requirement is included in the FDA food code for, in specific for the vomiting and diarrhea cleanup plan. It was included in the FDA food code in 2011. So many states have already been requiring this for about 10 to 11 years, right? Washington adopted it in 2000 when we did our most recent rule change. We adopted it in 2020. However, most of the food establishments around the US have probably already started to implement it. Now, there's a broad history of outbreaks caused by vomit and diarrhea in cruise ships, schools, concerts, restaurants. It's extensive, and we'll include a brief list of the links as resources when we share the final slides. I won't be going into the outbreaks that have been caused by vomit and diarrhea in food establishments. However, there is a long list of outbreaks, and we will include those with our final slide notes. Again, we adopted the provision in 2020, and from the time that the food code originally put the requirement in their code, they just required that businesses had a plan. However, when they updated the food code, they required that that plan be written. So they identified that the plan actually does need to be in writing. You can't just have a verbal plan. It is very clearly drafted that you have to have a written plan for cleanup of vomiting and diarrheal events. So here's the language in the code. The language of the plan, the requirement is included in section 02500 in Washington's food code. The language is relatively generic, and it allows the operator to create a plan to suit their needs. Again, it must be written, and it must address steps for 4 items: employee, consumers, food, and surface protection. Okay, so that's what you're going to see inside of our AMC Toolkit, how we look at suggestions on how to incorporate those 4 key components into a vomit and diarrhea cleanup plan. So the toolkit follows our routine pattern, a brief introduction and reminder to work with the local health department for specifics. So this is a copy of the vomit and diarrhea cleanup plan. It's important to note that the vomiting diarrheal cleanup plan is specific to the destruction of norovirus. Norovirus is a unique virus. It's what we call non-enveloped, and so it's difficult to actually destroy. The envelope, the coating around the virus, is usually what we use whenever we clean and sanitize and disinfect. We destroy that envelope, that protective coat. So in this case, norovirus doesn't have that protective coat that we can easily destroy. So noro is incredibly easy to spread person to person. It's also able to be spread through air, through surfaces, and it's also persistent, which means it is very difficult to destroy. Effective cleanup of vomiting diarrhea in a food establishment must be handled differently from routine cleaning. It is way more stringent than routine cleaning, and it also is going to involve a disinfecting process. In section 2, we have bullets to consider for protecting each of the 4 key points in the code that we just mentioned a moment ago. Ultimately, you really want to capture the incident. So I'll call the vomiting and diarrheal event potentially an incident. That's what I'm talking about whenever you have something of vomiting diarrhea exposure, so it doesn't continue to spread throughout the facility. While I'll be discussing these in order, please note that they are not likely going to be done step by step. It's going to be done, they're going to be conducted simultaneously. These aren't ranked in order of suggested occurrence. So our first step is to protect consumers potentially exposed to an active event. You'll see that we recommend removing customers from within 25 feet of a vomiting incident in particular. This is because studies have shown that norovirus particles, the actual virus, can be aerosolized and then transmit through the air. So that's unusual. Usually it's just direct exposure to something. In this case, norovirus can actually be aerosolized. So you'll see a lot of our guidance indicates to if somebody actively vomits inside of a room or a dining area, we're going to ask that you actually try to control everything within 25 feet of that incident. The second that you'll see is to protect food. We have quite a few tips on how to discard any uncovered foods within the contaminated area, and also to wash in utensils. The third is to ensure employees are protected. You're going to have to check with staff, see if any staff are sick, they should be sent home immediately. Sometimes that does happen where we'll have an ill food worker actually be the source of the vomit or the diarrheal event. So you want to really make sure to check with all staff to make sure that if any of them are symptomatic or feel sick, they need to be sent home immediately. Also make sure that any food that they prepared is discarded because potentially they were transmitting illness when they were actually working while ill. Also be very specific about which employees are selected to clean up the incident. These staff are going to be at increased risk of getting sick later due to exposure. Even when people use proper personal protective equipment, even when they follow procedures, they should go home immediately after the cleanup and then shower and change clothes. We also encourage you to watch staff for symptoms for 72 hours. Norovirus, traditionally, if you've been exposed to the virus, you will become symptomatic if you are going to have symptoms within the 72 hours. So again, for anyone that's cleaned up, even if they feel okay, they should be watched for 72 hours to make sure they don't get sick. Then finally, the last one is steps to protect surfaces. So again, norovirus is very persistent, and once it is on a surface, it can survive, so last and still be infectious for at least 5 days. So you are going to need to plan to what we call sop and soak. You want to keep the virus from going airborne. So you shouldn't be using a broom and sweeping things up. You should be saturating, you should be soaking things up. And that way it doesn't actually spread into the environment more. So again, we have a few tips here on how to protect surfaces. Everything, again, should be bagged and disposed of straight to the garbage. That's one of the biggest key functions is you do not want to bring whatever you've cleaned up in the cleanup area back to the kitchen and do additional work on it in the kitchen. Ideally, you would bag it and take it directly out to the garbage. You would not even take it throughout other portions of the building. All right, so now that we've identified the key points, let's look at making a cleanup kit. And I see that we have a couple of questions here, so we will cover those in a second here. All right, so page two is all about identifying your cleanup kit and making sure that you have it ready to go. What's important is that it's advanced work. This is not something you should be doing when you actually have an event to clean up. So you want to make sure you're prepared before the incident occurs. And preparation is always going to include finding the appropriate disinfectant. again, traditional food grade sanitizers routinely used in a kitchen are not going to be effective on norovirus and not acceptable for a proper cleanup plan. You can read the labels on EPA approved. They'll have an EPA approval, and if it's listed as a disinfectant, and it'll say whether or not it's effective against norovirus. However, if you want to go online, you can also do some advanced work and look for something called EPA's List G. Some of you might be familiar with this. List N became very popular in the last couple of years because those are the disinfectants effective against coronavirus, so COVID. But in this case, norovirus is List G. So again, a search for EPA's List G, and you will be able to sort and identify any disinfectants that are effective for norovirus. This is what you need to use inside of a disinfectant or a part of your disinfectant team inside of your cleanup kit. You may not use your routine sanitizers if they're not labeled for effectiveness against norovirus. So one of the other key components is that you look at the label to see if they can be used against some surfaces. So inside of every food establishment, they should go through and identify the surfaces that they have inside of there. So hard, non-porous surfaces such as tile, vinyl, sealed concrete, stainless steel, those are the easiest to disinfect. All right, if your facility is primarily a hard, non-porous surface, that you can follow the vast majority of disinfectant guidelines and do a very good job at disinfection. However, it gets more difficult as you go farther down the list. Things that are porous, so unsealed concrete, wood, you'll need to look for directions on the label to use for porous disinfection. Those are more difficult to disinfect. Things like carpet and upholstery, some of the disinfectants should not be used on fabrics. So you want to make sure that you're following the directions there. You might need to actually close the area and potentially steam clean if you're not able to identify a disinfectant that you can actually stop and saturate your carpet and upholstery. Same thing with linens and clothing. It's best usually to machine wash and dry those hot. Use chlorine bleach if possible. And then grass and outdoor concrete. You also need to think about outside areas in case you have to clean up those areas if someone were to have an incident, especially vomiting outdoors. All right, so again, it's really key that you think about the surfaces that you have in the facility and not just go, oh, I have my disinfectant, I'm ready to go. On top of that, you do need to create a cleanup kit. So again, you're going to want to think sop and saturate. And so you want to also think personal protective equipment. So just, you can use anything from, just things that you just store by. Hopefully, ideally, it would be disposable, something that you use once and you throw away. Anything that needs to be reused will need to be safely cleaned and disinfected. So we really encourage you to have items that you can actually just, sop up, throw into a garbage bag, and actually just take out straight to the garbage can. We also dedicated quite a bit of space to the disinfectant in the cleanup kit. And this is because we really want to encourage operators to read the label so that everyone is familiar with how to dilute or use the product. A lot of us are not familiar with reading the full label. We might only use it for a sanitizer or something along those lines. And so we just use standard guidance for use of chemicals. However, when you're using a disinfectant, you want to make sure you're using it according to the full label. So again, we really encourage people to look at whatever chemical they plan to use and make sure that they actually identify how they would mix it, if they have to dilute it, how it should be applied. And so that way they can make sure that they train staff. And finally, it's really important to make sure that the employees are trained on the procedures and aware of how to use the materials in the cleanup kit. A lot of facilities, when this became a requirement, they purchased a cleanup kit box. So they're like, oh, I have it right here, it's my box. But I really want to emphasize that is not a cleanup plan. Unless you've got something that's written for how you're going to clean up inside your facilities that you can train your employees on, that is not a plan. You need to have a written document that talks about how you're going to do the cleanup. So it's not enough just to have the cleanup kit. You need to make sure you also actually have the plan on how to do the actually separation, protect all the surfaces, all the customers, employees, and make sure that everything works for your facility. So it's not enough just to have the actual cleanup kit. Okay, so in summary, when an employee, customer, or other individual person vomits or has a diarrheal event in a food establishment, there is real potential for the spread of pathogens in the facility. So putting the proper response into action in a timely manner will help reduce the risk of likelihood that the food can become contaminated and then cause others to become sick because of that accident. So we encourage operators to review their policies and procedures to train and make sure staff are trained, able to prevent foodborne illnesses and respond correctly and effectively to emergencies. Every food establishment is required to have written vomiting, diarrhea cleanup plan that works for their business. So again, on the right are the key components of the vomiting diarrheal cleanup plan. It is different than routine sanitizing. You have to make sure you actually have a specific plan for cleanup of vomiting diarrheal events. I hope you never have to use it. However, we have some facilities that they're like, we have to do this weekly. So there are going to potentially be times that you actually have to activate your vomiting diarrheal cleanup plan. Make sure you address employees, customers, food, and surfaces. You have to cover those 4 items inside your plan. You also have to have a cleanup kit. You have to, you should keep it out of the food handling area. I think a lot of people, when they want to clean something up, they'll take it into the kitchen, but know that whatever we have there, you could be spreading the actual norovirus in this case, where it could go into your food and other equipment inside your kitchen. So you want to separate it out of your kitchen as much as possible. You also have to write it down. You may not have this one verbally. This one has to be written, and then you need to train and prepare your staff. Okay, so we have a couple of questions that I want to make sure that we cover inside of the conversation today. So feel free to add additional questions if you have them. Written should include pictures to help with language barriers when appropriate. So this is a common item, right? Where we have a lot of potential languages that are spoken inside of a food facility. We have a lot of individuals that prefer to listen rather than actually read, or they might learn better from a pictograph or images. And so, yes, I have seen some materials that were developed, especially by some of our local health partners, where it's much more picture centric. And so we would also encourage those. And I will make sure that we include when we see those links, that we include those in our update to you when we do our resources that are available. So yes, several of them are much more picture friendly, and that would be also something that would work. If that's your plan and you have it very appropriate, or where you've mixed in quite a few images, that will also work. Something that you could have for your actual facility plan. What you really need to do if you're a food establishment is make sure that all your employees, especially the ones that are going to be in the portion of response, know how to respond. Jennifer, I don't know if you want to go off mute. You have a lengthy question in here, a comment, so feel free if you want to go off mute. Otherwise, I will read it. It is, I work at a stadium. I oversee all the health and safety for the food and beverage company. The stadium has its own janitorial team, and my team does not clean or oversee the restrooms, not even the ones our team uses. How do you suggest I meet this role when the janitorial team is the responsible party and they do not have a plan that meets the WAC code? And I cannot direct them to create a plan to meet the WAC. Okay, well, this is an interesting conundrum. So the food establishment portion is required to make sure that they have that actively cleaned up. So if it happens, okay, you're gonna go off mute?
I can, yeah, it's you know, there's, how do you want to put it? Like territories, you know, everybody has their responsibility. And I can see us writing a plan for when something like an event like this would happen inside the kitchen. Let's say somebody gets sick, and that's not a problem to do something like that. But the issue comes where I've experienced, like years ago when I worked at Safeco Field, we had an incident at another facility up in Everett where a cheerleader came in and vomited outside of the bathroom. And it created, like, I don't know, a statewide competition, and it was a statewide illness where everybody got norovirus. And I went up and investigated that. And we had no control over it. And it's kind of how you approach the conversation, because my staff is going to be affected by anything they don't do in the janitorial or have the correct kind of training to clean this up. And I want to direct them, but you know, it's a little bit verboten because we work under different umbrellas. So I'm kind of asking for some guidance how we might approach that. I have some ideas, but I would certainly like to hear it from you.
Yeah, so ultimately the food establishment permit relies on the effective control of it, and it's on the premises. So we generally don't cover areas of, so a food court would be similar probably, where they might have in a mall, they have an event or vomiting and diarrheal incident, outside of a store, 300 feet away. So it's not even remotely close to the food establishment. And the food establishment has no control over that. And so ideally what would happen is then you would make sure that, because I think even the basic, your stadium example, they should say, okay, we're going to cordon people off. We're going to make sure that we, notify the food establishment or, the people that are in that area to go, yes, we're cleaning up an incident. We're going to cordon it off. We're going to containerize it as much as possible, not take it through your food establishment. So you can have something that marries with their plans to go, okay, this is how we're going to do it. If they have an event, we're going to make sure that they don't come in and use our mop, sink or something like that. We're going to separate our system that way. And then technically you could potentially have people, and one of the concerns and the reason why we ask people to block off an area is so that people don't walk through it and then, bring it into another area of the facility. So I would make sure with their plans that they containerize it off, and then they will do their own disinfection, but that should not necessarily transmit into your area if it's off of your premises outside of your portion of the food environment. However, I would encourage you to say, wait, we want to be notified if you do have an incident so that you can make sure that you review their plan. I'm assuming that they'll let you review their plan and that you make sure that they're not having people actually walk through it and bring it into your facility and not using your food establishment for the actual cleanup portion, which I doubt that they would. So if it's under your overall structure, because you're in a large facility, then you may not have a lot of control over how it does it. I think someone also mentioned with school kitchens, it's probably similar. They might have, and this is the one when I said we have some facilities that have this weekly. It's schools. They report commonly that students are, potentially have a vomiting incident that they have to clean up, and so this will be something that you do have to account for. But again, if it's not within their food establishment portion, that's really what you have control over. I don't know if that's helpful, Jennifer, but we can look at that to see if we have other suggestions for how to kind of marry those when you're in a facility that is much larger than your structure and you don't have overall control over the entire facility.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, those are the thoughts that I had, was to meet with them and see what their plans are and how developed their plans are, and maybe able to help them develop their plan a little bit better. But, sometimes that's a welcomed thing and sometimes it's not. So, so it's a little delicate. Yeah.
I think if you have ability to review their plans and, to contribute in times to go, okay, wait, we want to make sure that you containerize it so it stays within that general zone, and then it would be great if they would notify you so that you're aware, so you can make sure that you're, reminding your staff about proper protocols, and then not using your facility to actually clean out their equipment or any of the needs along those lines. And then if they have, I think they probably use a pretty strong disinfectant. I think they will use something probably that's effective for probably quite a few different pathogens. So if you can just say, hey, make sure it's effective and labeled for norovirus, which again is becoming a very common thing that they are validated for. So I think most of the disinfectants that they use, like, yes, we will make sure it also is effective for norovirus.
Yeah, so they do a very good job of cleaning from what I observed. So yeah, I'm assuming that they do have this type of protocol. So
yeah. And I think that's a little bit different than what I expected, actually. So you would have ability to clean up inside your food establishment portion, right? Where it's like, no, we can follow these procedures in my portion. Or would you say, oh no, we're going to call the janitorial team to come into our food establishment?
Okay. We would clean within our area of responsibility. Okay. So we would have a separate one for our kitchens and concessions and things like that. But when it moves into the shared space, that becomes a different territory. And they're a really effective team. They're a very good team. And I'm just was wondering what your thoughts were, really, if they were along the lines of mine, of blending the two and that type of thing.
I think that's really important. And I think you need to look at it from, so in your zone, it's going to be, I'm here as the food safety infection control, right? But I'm part of the resident of this entire thing. Look to me for your infection control guidance, because this could, like you said, turn into something that's not necessarily foodborne at that point. Now it's just spreading person to person. And so I would encourage you to look at it that way and make sure they have someone that either, understands infection control or reaches out to their local health department to say, hey, we could use some help on this to make sure we're controlling any potential spread. From a wide variety of pathogens. In food service, we're primarily looking at, especially when we're talking about vomiting, we are primarily looking at norovirus. But there could be quite a few different things they have to clean up. So we're not even covering blood and other biological fluids. But so we really do want to make sure that they are following a solid procedure for infection control. My guess is a large facility like that is, however, it can always be fine-tuned. So thanks for bringing that up. Now, Emily is bringing up the kind of a different angle. So Emily, I think her example with schools is that, well, wait a second, the kitchen staff don't necessarily clean it up. They call in a janitor. So this is another one that has to marry their plans. In this case, the school kitchen does need to make sure that whatever the janitor does would actually meet the code intent. So protecting those 4 key elements: employees, forgive me, the surfaces, the food, and the consumers, in this case, the students and the teachers, whoever is working inside the facility. So they have to make sure that that plan actually works for there. And so, yes, if they actually have it in the plan as in the janitorial team, then they should have a copy that's accessible inside the kitchen as well. And then the staff need to be trained. The kitchen staff would need to be trained on how to actually implement the plan from the janitorial group. So great job. Those are 2 a little bit different, but they're very similar. You're going to have to marry what's going on in the kitchen with the larger facility as a whole. Jennifer is talking about difficulty during an inspection to verify establishments have a written plan in a different language. This will have to be done in the office after the inspection, after translation. So yes, this would, a lot of plans will, especially if the food establishment is not, does not speak English, the plans will be written in the language that they understand. And so, yes, this will potentially need something that's going to require additional work on the partnership between the facility and the regulatory team. So ideally, it's not required that it be in English. So hopefully that they have something that you are able to review on translation. And again, this would benefit from a little bit of discussion, in advance, talking about them now, saying, okay, do you have a plan? Do you need help with a plan? Do you have materials that you need? Again, we'll have it translated into a total of 5 languages. So hopefully one of those will help, but we can also look at additional ones if that's helpful. But ideally, it's going to take a little bit of a partnership if you have food establishments that don't all have English as their primary language. And please do account for that. Even if the management team is, speaks English, or some of the staff speak English, make sure that all of their staff are able to be trained regardless of the language that they primarily use. So Sunny, we have situations where there is not always multiple people to designate a cleaning person. Great example. One cook, one bartender working. After cleaning, they don't have the option to go home and shower. I've suggested full gown and body coverage suits for cleaning if the worker is not have the opportunity to shower. So yes, these are becoming pretty widely available. They're disposable. They can use whatever they can actually generate. I've seen people actually, might sound strange, but I've seen people put a hole in a garbage bag, a large lawn and leaf bag, and they'll cover their clothing with that. Ideally, they would be able to change their clothes, and they definitely need to follow the separation and then wash, rinse, and wash their hands very, very well and remove, as much as they could that was potentially contaminated. So it will take a bit potentially more protective equipment, maybe additional training if they don't have others that are able to go home.
When you turn off your today.
Okay, what about diarrhea in the restroom? Flushing action of toilet aerosolizes it throughout the restroom. And they have shown that through a lot of consumer studies. And, there is a little bit of research about diarrhea in the restroom. So that's probably going to be routine kind of cleanup. It's probably not going to be visible. So it's one of the reasons why we do encourage people when they leave the restroom, when they go into the kitchen, they should wash their hands again. In Washington, we call it the double hand wash. So whatever you've picked up transit kind of germs that you've actually removed when you get into the kitchen. However, if it's a large cleanup, it would be the similar response to what we're talking about with the vomit primarily. So it would need to go through, the SOP and saturate, disinfection, and then ideally the person that has to do the cleanup would actually be able to leave, or as Sunny mentioned, wear quite a bit of protective clothing that they could actually remove and discard. Again, it's not something that we traditionally look at about the aerosolization when it's coming from the flushing action of the toilet, but it is a slight potential. It has been shown in a couple of studies. Yes, and we'll have someone that asked to show how to unlock the documents. If you can linger a little bit, I will do that after the session in just a moment. Are inspectors expected to just check the businesses have a written cleanup plan, or should we be reviewing it and ensuring it is all correct? Also, should we look for the cleanup kit? So ideally, in order to verify that they have the vomit and diarrhea cleanup plan, you should be making sure that it does incorporate those 4 key components, that people are making sure that their plan incorporates the employees, the food, the customers, and the surfaces. And then, yes, you should look to make sure that they have a cleanup kit. You don't need to necessarily go through and talk to them about how they're going to use each implement, but do try to just encourage them to make sure that it's not something that they're going to plan on cleaning inside of the actual kitchen. So hopefully they've been able to go, yes, I've thought about how to do this to make sure. Again, this is a rare event. However, we have seen numerous outbreaks linked back to someone vomiting, especially in a food establishment, whether it's in the banquet hall, in the back food prep area, in the actual dining room. So again, you do want to make sure that they are prepared for this. Shouldn't necessarily be something that you have to do on every inspection, but just make sure, especially as we're rolling out this new requirement, that they're familiar with it, that they know that they have tools. Okay, so this is a question about the written instructions that commonly come inside a vomit and diarrhea cleanup kit. So it's hard to say if they're going to be sufficient. You want to make sure that whoever's the person in charge has reviewed that and said, yes, this actually fits for our facility. You want to make sure that they're able to actually follow it and effectively clean up or disinfect whatever surfaces get contaminated. So in general, my guess is that they're going to have to do a little bit of fine tuning to fit it to that food facility. However, if it's like, nope, it covers all the key components that we talked about, and as long as they're familiar with it and comfortable with it and they feel that it'll work, that should be sufficient. You just want to really make sure that they're able to get this to actually work for them going forward. So that's a great question. But again, they just have to review it. A lot of times when I've talked to people about their cleanup plan, they will open up the box while we're standing there. So again, the really key component is that they are reviewing it and actually making sure that it works for them. Again, it's probably a rare event. So, it's not something that we need to really potentially drill in and make them go through all the steps while we're there. Just want to make sure that they're familiar with it, that they're training their staff. And so they're like, yes, we know how to respond to this. Again, the link to the documents. So Craig, thank you for the refresh there. It's doh.wa.gov/food rules. Highly encourage you to look at those materials, especially since that's one of the reasons why we schedule these sessions over the span of 5 days. As you get more familiar with the documents, if they're relatively new to you, we hope that you'll reach out and ask us questions as we go through them. Again, we're just highlighting them today. You can also directly connect with your local county health department. So we have the list or the internet site for that, so that you can actually also reach out directly to your local health department. Local health departments often generate and create wonderful training materials. And so we've seen definitely some drafts that we will share as the wrap up to all of our sessions, because again, a lot of those, our materials for the AMC Toolkit are very text heavy. Again, we're providing them in multiple languages, but again, they're very text heavy. So a lot of jurisdictions actually have materials that are much more visually friendly. And so we'll make sure that we keep those connections for you going forward as well. And are multiple written plans required if multiple languages are spoken in the food establishment? No, they only need to have one written plan. However, I would encourage you to talk with them, or if you're running a food establishment, to make sure, okay, wait, am I able to translate this to whoever actually does need to do the work, so that they are properly trained? And so when I say translate, I mean interpret. So maybe it's just verbally that you've trained them, but you have the written plan. All right, but staff need to be trained on it. They don't need to be able to necessarily read the written plan. They need to know how to follow and how to do their tasks that they've been assigned. So again, it only has to have one plan per establishment, and it doesn't say which language it has to be in. Ideally, it's in English if it's going to be for a regulator that needs to read that language. However, it really needs to fit the operation. So if they do not communicate in English and it's not effective for them, then it will be in the language of their choosing. And then examples of training verification. So Lakin, that would be talking with the person in charge and just asking questions. So, you know, have you trained staff on this? Can you talk to me about what would happen? Can you tell me which staff would be expected to do the cleanup? You know, just talking with them about questions about how they've trained employees. In general, you don't need to necessarily go down to the employee level to actually do a verification. It should be enough to communicate with a person in charge about how they're doing it. And again, it's more to encourage them to make sure that their staff are properly trained. And then Lars thinks of this as an ill worker policy as the fire extinguisher policy. You hope you never have to need it, but it's there when you do. And I guess I look at it similarly. I'm one of the kind of people that whenever I travel long distances, I go over the mountain pass, I pretty much make sure the car is fully packed with a sleeping bag and all sorts of, you know, coats and things. And I just plan on not needing it. But the times that I've been a little bit stranded are the times that we potentially didn't have it. So yes, I think it's very important to have a plan. I hope you never have to use it, but know that you're going to have to keep reminding people about it. Staff training, talking with individuals, bring it up during inspections, and just make sure they, if they have any questions. We start having norovirus this time of year. Can you talk to me about how you have to clean up an incident? And when's the last time it happened? Has it ever happened here? Just include it in a normal conversation, whether you're a regulator talking to food industry, or if you're a food manager and you're talking to your staff, just make sure that incorporate it into a normal conversation. Whenever somebody has an event, it's very disruptive. And so we want to make sure it's hopefully as smooth as possible so they can do the proper containment, clean up, and then disinfect, and then potentially go on with their important business. And again, I want to thank you. I really enjoy having everyone in the room today, and hopefully these are beneficial for you. Again, we're just highlighting the AMC Toolkit documents. Really hope that those are a useful item for you. Hopefully also it gives you a little bit of a fuller understanding of the code requirements. If you have any questions specifically about the code, please do reach out to us or to your local health departments, making sure that you all have a connection there. Really do hope that you'll also join us for tomorrow's session, which is all about date marking. We will start bright and early at 8:30. So again, thank you all for joining us. Thanks for coming to the snippet, and we will talk to you tomorrow. If you want to linger though, I will walk you through how to open the developer tab on the Word documents.